Loud by nature. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Good. All right. So what I'm here to talk to you guys today about is information security programs and how we can create comprehensive programs out of what used to be segmented areas of responsibility. My background, so my name is Jeremy Wittkop. I'm the Director of Sales Engineering for IntelliSecure. My background is I used to be the Director of Managed Services. So creating programs is something that's near and dear to my heart and something that I've been doing for a long time. So let's get started. So first of all, who is IntelliSecure? All right. IntelliSecure, basically, in a nutshell, what we do is we protect critical information assets. So if you think about traditional security, perimeter-based security, router switches, firewalls, bits byte signatures, that's not us. What we do is we focus on particular information assets that are critical to organizations, and how do we protect those specifically. And that's a little bit of a different perspective that you're going to get from us than what you might be used to hearing from other people. One of the things and one of the reasons why I'm here speaking to you guys in this audience specifically about this is the difference between this and your traditional security looking for indicators of compromise, signatures, those kinds of things, is this requires the business, all of the business to participate in order for it to be effective. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. How do we define what a critical information asset is? How do we protect a critical information asset from both a technical, traditional perspective as well as a content and context-aware perspective? So getting into the meat and potatoes, why are we here? Well, the reason why we're all here today, and the reason why we're talking about this specifically, is that the world around us has changed. The change has really been going on since about 2007. There's been an evolution in the threat landscape, but it really became forefront in our minds and prevalent to us really starting in 2013. 2013 was the year of the mega breach until 2014 was the year of the mega breach, right? Every year it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But 2013 was when we first started seeing things like this on the headline news in the evening. We started seeing the Target breach on the news or in Time magazine, these kinds of things where historically data was being stolen, but it wasn't being stolen on the scale where it was being reported as widely as it has been of late. So 4 breaches really contributed to that, culminating in the Target breach towards the fourth quarter of 2013. First was Facebook. Facebook contains a treasure trove of information about individuals. In fact, a lot of people who are doing identity theft, things like that, the first thing that they're going to do when they get a name and a social security number is look that person up on Facebook. They'll probably find their mother's maiden name. They'll probably find where they live. They might be able to ascertain their zip code based on the information on Facebook. Post they're at this Applebee's or that Home Depot. They probably live close to both of those locations. All the information I would need to steal your identity is probably on Facebook, assuming I have your social security number. So what Facebook had done is essentially they had a software glitch that exposed about 6 million users' personal information, right? So things like your address, your phone number, things that should only be shared with a select group of people were exposed publicly. And that was the first. And then in October of that year, Adobe, they take credit card numbers for renewals, things like that, directly through their software. They were breached to the tune of about 3 million credit cards. Started to gather a little bit of momentum. Then the Federal Reserve was hacked by Anonymous. They posted a bunch of information about the people who work at the Federal Reserve. If you know anything about Anonymous, they're not the biggest fans of the Federal Reserve. So sympathizers were using that information to harass people, things like that. And then came Target. And we all know what happened with Target, 40 million credit cards in the middle of the holiday shopping rush. And suddenly we have the perfect storm, the recipe for big news and data security. So that was 2013. And people in the industry have been saying this has been going on for a while, but it's getting worse, right? And that's the effect of the quote here. So moving into 2014, we started to say, or in November 2014, they say officials say cybersecurity now trumps terrorism as the #1 threat to the United States. It's kind of an interesting statement, and the gravity of that statement takes a second to really process. But if you think about it, what cybersecurity threats are to us is economic terrorism. That's essentially what it is to the United States. The United States economy is based on ideas. We are an idea-driven economy. We don't manufacture a whole lot in the United States anymore. We don't do a whole lot other than intellectual property. That's who we are. So protecting that intellectual property from a cybersecurity perspective becomes of extreme economic importance. So moving into 2014, what we saw eBay. eBay was interesting. Each of these different things we'll talk about here because they're all interesting for a different reason from a cybersecurity perspective. So what happened at eBay, they had a single user's credentials compromised. That user had access to all of eBay's 145 million people's information. So if you're looking at the concept of least privilege, separation of duties, one person having access to that much information is a problem. And this is exactly why. If that user's credentials are compromised, then now you've lost access to all of that information. We had community health systems. This is the most expensive breach in healthcare history, 4.5 million records. The reason it's the most expensive breach is the Department of Health and Human Services decided there was willful neglect. The reason why is because the Heartbleed vulnerability, which was, again, front page news about 8 months before this breach, was well known. There was patches available for it, and community health systems didn't patch their systems, and that's how they were actually breached. That particular breach was very expensive for the folks at community health systems, and it was across 29 states, 4.5 million patients. A lot of information was taken. Interesting thing about community health systems and healthcare breaches in general is, a lot of people don't understand this, but a credit card number on the black market worth about 50 cents, health record worth about $50. And the reason is because in your health record, you probably have financial information. You have enough information for me to sell your identity. You have information about what diseases you've had or what afflictions you've had, how you were treated, and how successful it was. So that's very valuable information to pharmaceutical companies. There's lots of different ways I can split that up and sell it. So a health record is of the utmost importance. It has everything about you. Specs was interesting. They're a wine retailer in Texas. They're a liquor store, essentially. What was interesting about Specs, so it's about 550,000 people were affected by this breach, but it's the information that they got. They got debit card numbers with PINs. They got credit card numbers with expiration dates and CVV codes. They got people's addresses, phone numbers, everything that you would need from that individual. And the way that they did it was essentially Specs has their own card. You sign up with your credit card number, your check number, your bank account number, and they give you a card you can actually charge, just like a credit card or a debit card. Problem with that was there was someone in between the point of sale system and the network that was just taking a copy and diverting it. And they were there for 18 months. So they got everybody's information who signed up in that 18-month period. When we talk about the cyber threat kill chain, that's very important because Specs had no idea this was going on. Had they been monitoring this appropriately and they found it in a month, we may be talking about 500-600 people instead of 550,000. JP Morgan Chase, again, very well-known breach in the vein of Target. Same with Home Depot. Very similar breach in Home Depot, commoditized malware, very similar to what we saw at Target. There's debate around whether it was put there at the same time or whether it was just kind of sold off after Target was successful to other organizations that were trying to do similar things to other retailers, kind of on the hope and the assumption that nothing was being done to stop it from happening. Home Depot proved that assumption to be correct. Then we had Sony. Sony was interesting because Sony is what I would call the cyber terrorism attack. They didn't attack Sony to gain money or financial benefit like they did with all these others. They attacked Sony to embarrass people, to destroy the company, to cause harm to the reputation, which again is a troubling sign because we hadn't seen that in a long time, at least not from a sophisticated attacker. We had seen a lot of cyber crime. So before Sony, the trend in the industry from the FBI counterterrorism, counter-cyber-terrorism unit was saying that we've moved from cyber mischief to cyber crime. We're trying to steal things now. And then Sony went back to kind of cyber terrorism, high-end cyber mischief. They were attempting to cause harm. The goal was not financial gain, which is an interesting thought. So this brings us to my favorite slide because it has pretty pictures, and I love pictures. So Al Capone is not stealing your data, but he is representative of something. So we'll go through it. First of all, this is from the FBI. Those of us in information security often work with the FBI. They have InfraGard chapters set up around the United States where we can interface as businesses with the FBI. FBI can share information with us. We can share information with them. They can help us. They have particular people that are dedicated to cybersecurity, and this is what they have to say. They basically have divided the threat actors into 4 categories with their main target of data into another 4 categories. So we can talk about who they are and what they're doing, and this is going to help us with threat modeling as we start to talk about what we need to do to protect ourselves. So the first, they say spies in nation states, and they want our intellectual property. Especially, this could be corporate espionage, this could be state-sponsored espionage, but for whatever reason, if you have intellectual property, you're probably going to be targeted by different people than if you're talking about credit card data or healthcare records. So that's the first category. Second is organized criminals who want our identities and money. This includes healthcare records, this includes credit card numbers, anything that they can monetize. Al Capone, again, is just what I think of when I think of organized crime. So he's up there, although I don't think he's hacked anything. And then the next one is terrorists that want to attack our power grid, water supply, want to cause harm to the infrastructure. I haven't heard a lot about this, but again, this is something that if it was happening, we probably wouldn't know about. Right? It'd probably be classified. But they say it's happening, and I believe them. They know more than I do about this. And then hacktivist groups like Anonymous who want to make a political or social statement. Essentially, if you fall on the wrong side of their beliefs, then they will come in and hack your Twitter account or your Facebook or go steal something or post some things. Generally not after money, though. So why is this important? In order to protect ourselves, we have to understand what the threats are against the particular assets that we have. So now we've talked about the fact we need to identify what's important to our business, right? We need to protect it from specific threat actors who are trying to do something with it. This is starting to sound less like information security and starting to sound more like spy versus spy or a business conversation, right? And that's the conversation that we're having with our customers. And the reason is the threats are evolving. Advanced persistent threats are exactly that. Just having a commoditized, if this happens, then we're under attack kind of perimeter defense is still important, but it's not the only thing that you have to do to protect yourself from people who are actually adjusting and being adaptable when they're getting into take out your data. So essentially, this is the cyber threat kill chain. What's interesting about this, and what we're going to talk about here, is we like to focus on this back half, and we'll talk about that in a second. But essentially, this is all the things that have to happen in order for somebody to take information out of your environment. This is what they're doing. One of the interesting things about this, though, is the perimeter is evaporating. Some people say it's changing. I say it's evaporating. There's very few organizations that I walk into that can say that they have all their data contained inside of their four walls with firewalls and all the traditional security products. People are in the cloud. People are storing information at Office 365. Your email may not even be housed in your environment anymore. So as such, the front half of the kill chain is something that may be out of our control. We don't control the perimeter. We don't control the data center. We have no control over those things. So what we like to focus on is the exfiltration of data and stopping people from being able to cover their tracks and remain undetected. So the longer someone's in your network, the more data they can take, right? Or after your data. They may not be in your network. They may be in the cloud. They may be somewhere else. But the longer they're there, that we don't know that they're there, the more they can take. That's a simple concept, and it's something very key to how we build our programs. Second thing is, if I want to steal this chair, if I get in the room, who cares, right? I can even sit in the chair. But I can't sell that chair. I can't profit from that chair until I take that chair out that door, right? So the exfiltration of data is where we like to focus, because the assumption is we're all in this room, right? We have to be in this room. In order for us to do business, in order for this conference to happen, I have to let you in the door. Doesn't mean I have to let you take things with you when you leave. And that's how we're looking at information security today. So critical asset protection, what is it? First of all, a critical asset, we'll talk about in a moment what they are, but essentially anything that has financial value to your business, anything that we say has an impact on the bottom line. Think current and future revenue streams. Think core operational impact. Things if you lose them, it costs you money to replace them. Research and development, projected revenues, these kinds of things. Everything we're going to talk about to you guys, if we talk about critical assets, is going to tie back to your balance sheet. It's going to be what's sitting on that balance sheet. It's going to be what's projected, what's driving that budget in the next 5 years. Those kinds of things is what we're talking about. We're no longer talking about bits, bytes, and signatures. We're talking about specific information assets. And the way that we define how we're going to track the movement of those assets in your organization is in 3 areas: content, community, and channel. So the content, what is it, right? So what is the asset? How do we define it through the system? The community, who should be using it? Who should send it? Who should receive it? What should they be able to do with it? The channel, how should that information be transmitted so that it's protected? Right? So this is one of the conversations we can have, generally a conversation with the business unit level to talk about these kinds of things. When we take that same critical asset and we have a conversation with the people who are actually administering how that critical asset moves through the environment, right? You're more technical folks, and to them we use different nomenclature, things that are going to resonate with them. So how is it created? How do we get it? Where do we intake this data? If it's a health record, maybe it's a referring physician that's sending us the data, or a patient providing it on a form. If it's research and development, maybe we have a team that's developing these things, right? Once we have it, we have to store it somewhere. Where is it stored? How should it be stored? Should it be encrypted at rest? Who should have access to it? Those kinds of things. How is it used? Who can do what with it? Just because I can access information and use it to do my job doesn't mean I can save it on a USB and take it home, or Gmail it to myself, right? Different ways I can use the information in an authorized versus unauthorized manner, even if I'm an authorized user. So now we're getting away from just user profiles and getting more into the nuances of how authorized users are using information, privileged user monitoring, things like that. And then transmission, how do I send it from point A to point B in a secure manner, and who should I be sharing this information with? From that information, I should say information assets. So from that information, we can build a program around this is what normal looks like and this is what abnormal looks like. And if we see X, then we need to do Y, right? So here's some examples of critical assets that we could identify. You have personally identifiable information, transaction information. That stuff's easy, right? When we talk about the different industries that are being breached, this is one of the reasons why the heavily regulated places like financial sector, things that have been under regulation for a long time, are responsible for less of the breaches than other organizations that have more product formulas, product design, and research information. That's much more difficult to identify in transit on a network. That's one of the specialties of our organization. If you guys want to talk about that more, we're at the WebSense booth. Stuart is with our organization as well. You can come talk to us about how we would protect different types of information that may be outside the pale of what you're thinking a content and context-aware system could protect. How do we protect information assets? So there's a couple of ways. We have to look at data from an unstructured versus a structured perspective. Structured is going to be your credit card, your social security number. It's very easy to define to a system. It's in a regular pattern. There's rules about which numbers are valid, which numbers are invalid, how they should look in a transaction in order to know that they are what they are. But the unstructured data is, the can of Mountain Dew right there. What's the product formula for that Mountain Dew? Those kinds of things are a little bit more difficult to define. You can do it. It's a little bit more difficult. How do we make the can? What are the plans for the can? What types of aluminum are we using? This type of information in Mountain Dew may be commoditized, but in other products it may be very secret. A lot of times we're operating with trade secrets in that realm, those kinds of things, right? The way that we protect information assets is generally with content and context-aware systems. Notice I said that instead of a specific product. The reason is product names change. Different things happen. The industry evolves. But there has been a product released in the last 10 years that have started to gain momentum called data loss prevention. That's today what we would use for content and context awareness and integration with other systems like web gateways and email gateways. Data loss prevention may have a life cycle. There may be another product that comes out, but since the inception of data loss prevention and the change in the information security landscape, we are always going to need some kind of solution that can identify content and context of data as it moves throughout a network in order to protect it. There's so much data moving. Everyone has so much electronic assets, information assets, that we're always going to need to be able to tell what's critical from what's not. What's normal communication from what needs to be protected. So this isn't going to go away, regardless of whether products change. Oh. Causes of data breaches. So what's changed? This evolution since 2007, you heard me mention it. If you look, and these are really small, it's kind of an eye chart, but essentially 2007, we were looking at accidental exposure and data on the move, right? So in 2007, think back to 2007, most things weren't encrypted. The vast majority of websites were HTTP and not HTTPS. I could sit there with a packet sniffer outside your network and see your information moving in the clear, your email, your web post, those kinds of things. So that was data on the move. Accidental exposure, there was a lot less awareness about information security back then. Employees would often give away information through social engineering or unsophisticated attacks because they just didn't know any better. They were trusting. You've seen a lot of that stuff go down as we move to 2014. Those things aren't gone, but they're more in line with other things. Now we're seeing a lot more hacking. We're seeing a lot more third-party exposure. We're seeing negligence, those kinds of things. And we'll talk a little bit about towards the end, what we're doing about that and how we're linking those things together. But it's a very different attack profile, and our response has to be very different in order to defeat it. Data breaches by industry, a couple things I want to point out here. You can see the traditional ones that we think about, banking, credit, financial. It's only 8.1% of the breaches. Those things have gone way down. And the reason why? They've been under attack for a very long time, and they've taken measures to protect themselves. The other reason why is their information, we find out, isn't near as valuable as the other sectors. We always think about financial institutions. If I can steal a bank account number, a credit card number, that must be more valuable, right? But that's not true. I told you how much a healthcare record was worth on the open market. That's a pretty astounding number. We're talking about 100 times what a credit card number is worth, right? So we're seeing a lot more of that just because of how valuable it is. Business information, financial plans, talking industrial espionage, maybe product designs. We've seen a lot of that stuff. Your 5-year plan, what are you doing? Your competitors might want to know that, right? Those kinds of things are on the rise to account for about 1/3 of all the data breaches that we're seeing now. So Just the purpose behind this is you can tell by the sectors that the targeted information is starting to change. So we need to be aware of that. What might people want? What could cause harm to the company? What could give our competitors an advantage? These kinds of things we need to be talking about. It used to be, if I wanted your plans, if you're a manufacturing company, I had to get into your factory somehow and take your plans. I don't have to do that anymore. I can access your network from anywhere in the world. It's great for your employees, but it's also great for people who might want to be stealing your information. Infrastructure assets are important as well. So how do I define a critical infrastructure asset? Generally, anything that stores, processes, or transmits an information asset. So how do we look at those things? I'll talk a little bit about the toolbox. The toolbox is your traditional stuff, your IDS, IPS, routers, switches, firewalls. Anything that generates a log is a key source of information for us, because then we can start to see anomalous behavior from a technical perspective as well. So we have user-generated events we've already talked about. User A does something with data point B, right? And then we have system-generated events, which is what we're talking about now. This is a more traditional toolbox. How do we look at this? So we'll talk about identifying threats and baselining and threat modeling in a future slide. Essentially, we've talked a little bit about threat modeling. But what do we do to protect it? We have to have some sort of centralized visibility system. Today, those systems are generally SIM systems, or Blue Coat has a new product that I just talked to them about. Can't remember the name off the top of my head, but essentially, they're visibility monitoring systems. We're going to take all the logs from all of our devices, and we're going to put it in some way where we can look through it instead of trying to read millions of logs a day. We're going to put it and display that information, something centralized that we can see, that we can consume. That's going to be the key, because there's too much information for us to go through. It's all valuable, but there's just too much of it. So how do we do that? A lot of times it's a SIM system today, but it doesn't really matter. What the key piece is we need to have streamlined alerting, right? And we need to have a centralized logging and reporting mechanism that can show us the results of all those logs, and the machine can do the work for us. Vulnerability scanning. I put this up here, and the reason I talk about this is vulnerability scanning is a couple of things now. It's widely available. You can purchase a cloud account and do some vulnerability scanning, and it's cheap. Why do those things matter? Because generally what I tell people is if you're not scanning your network for vulnerabilities, you're probably the only one. It's easy for me, if I'm an attacker, to go set up an account in the cloud and I can scan a bunch of IPs that aren't mine. Nobody makes me prove it's my network that I'm scanning. So the same way you can scan your own IPs, somebody else can scan them. So making sure that we're aware of the same vulnerabilities that everyone else is. Good example of this is CHS. Quick vulnerability scan would have told them that those systems weren't patched. Somebody may have told them they were patched. There was obviously no verification done, and somebody else found that hole before they did. So you can't mend the fence if you don't know there's a hole in it, right? So how do we build a program? We'll talk about 4 elements. There's lots of elements, but we'll talk about 4 in the interest of time. We have threat modeling. We talked a little bit about it. I'll share with you a slide and an exercise so you guys can take it back and think through it in your own organization. Talk about incident response planning. If you don't have a plan, you're planning to fail, right? Those kinds of things. We'll talk about that a little bit. Security humanistics, which is really the human element of security. How do we take what the machines are telling us and make sense of it in order to get to the nuance that we're talking about here with the critical information assets and how it affects your business? And then testing the plan. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So threat modeling. I love this chart. I'll share it with you guys if you want. This is essentially the easiest way to break down and monetize threat modeling from my perspective. So essentially we have the resource. We've been calling these critical assets up to this point. They call it a resource. That's fine. The threat. What are we afraid of happening to that resource? If we take the resource times what we're afraid happening to the resource, we get an impact. Generally going to represent that in a dollar amount. So if this thing happens to this thing, how much does that cost our business? Either in lost revenue or fines or what have you, right? So that's the impact side, and that's a dollar amount. Then you have the vulnerability. How can the threat occur? We've been scanning. We know how these things can happen. We can war game these things out. Divided by the mitigation. What are we doing to stop said things from happening? Are we patching our systems? Are we starting to monitor certain things that we weren't monitoring before? That's going to give you a probability, generally expressed in number of times it's going to happen per year. If it happens once every 20 years, then it's 0.05, right? If it happens 3 times a year, it's a 3. You take the impact, the dollar amount, times the probability, and you get an annualized number that you can expect that threat to cost you, right? Then you can put in additional mitigation steps, and then you get another number, and the difference in that number is the value of your security program. So that's one way we can go up to the CFO and we can say, this is our risk exposure. If we take this measure that costs X amount of dollars, we get Y amount of return on investment. It's a calculation that we can share that takes something like security, which traditionally has just been kind of, we're going to spend money on it and hope it helps us. and start to monetize that and see what kind of benefit we're actually going to get, and then measure that benefit over time and start to play into our budgeting cycle. Incident response planning consists of 4 areas. It's plan, do, check, act. We're ISO. That's how we think. Continuous process improvement. If you're ITIL, same kind of deal. Essentially, you prepare. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a plan. We may not know a whole lot. It doesn't have to be a perfect plan. There's really no such thing, right? I'm from a military background. They say no, almost no plan survives first enemy contact, right? So we understand that, but we need to have some kind of basis to start with. Then we're going to put in some kind of system to detect and analyze whatever is happening. Again, all the things we've talked about are different detection and analysis methods, but essentially we detect and attack. We have to detect it in order to put the plan in place. Once we do that, containment, eradication, and recovery is most important. Recovery is something we really need to think about. I've seen a whole lot of people that are really good at containment and eradication that don't think about recovery, and what they've essentially done is they've caused harm to themselves, right? Because now we've essentially segmented the network and we've trapped our threat, but nobody can access the resources they need to do business, so we've actually caused more harm than the threat did in the first place. So we don't want to do that. We want to talk about how do we contain and eradicate this threat quickly and get back to a normal operating state as fast as possible, because time is money. So we do all those things, and then post-incident activity is, okay, we did this, we saw what happened, we did our remediation. How effective were we, and how do we modify that plan so that we're better next time? And this is a continuous process improvement cycle. This isn't a destination. It's more of a journey. And then we get into, so that's how we plan. The other thing I want to point out is this is your traditional model on the outside. You have an external threat who's going to make some kind of intrusion to become an insider threat. Then they're going to make some kind of extrusion and become external again, just like I was talking about carrying the chair out of the room. Problem with that is we have to assume that they're already an insider threat. So how are we looking at this nowadays? We're looking at the extrusion itself, right? How am I taking it out? Because they may be inside your network already. We have to assume that people have penetrated our porous perimeter, because the perimeter has become very porous by necessity. By business drivers have made us take things out of our secure data centers and put them other places so that our resources can access them from anywhere in the world. So what does that mean? It means attackers can access them from anywhere in the world. So we have to watch to make sure that they're not leaving those authorized locations. So we just have to kind of change our thinking a little bit as the world changes around us. We have to adapt. Security humanistics. So what's important about this? As you can see, logs and reports do not reveal the whole story. Essentially, systems are great at identifying patterns, but it takes a human being to say, is that an authorized pattern or an unauthorized pattern? Is that something that's approved? Is that something that's necessarily the best way that we can be doing business? Is it secure? Are we exposing ourselves? These kinds of questions can't be answered by a machine. It takes a person. We're asking business questions now. We're using a technology solution to help us identify and answer business questions. Business questions can't be analyzed with a mathematical formula, which is essentially all a technology system is. So we have to bring in the human element. The correlation between technologies and incidents requires that human element. We have technologies that help us discover things. I can't read 1 million logs in a day. Machines are great at that. But when it tells me something, I have to tell it what it means. Machines aren't very good at that. We are. And then humanistics includes people using information as well as those monitoring information. So when we talk about security humanistics, we're not just talking about looking at a system and responding. That's important. We're also talking about how are people using the data, feeding back that loop to our users to make sure that they're behaving in a way that's more in line with what we're trying to accomplish. And then finally, testing the plan. We call this red team and blue team. That's why I have that cool little graphic with the people holding up the team, which I think is great. And then I have my little ninja. Anyway, so what is red team and blue team exercises? Essentially, a red team and blue team exercise. The red team is simulated attacker. The blue team is your normal operations, right? So why do we do this? Well, we do this because we want to test our plan. We want to make sure. So we essentially tell the red team, we want you to go steal X, Y, and Z from this location, from the outside, without any credentials. And we don't tell the blue team anything. And then generally, the idea is if the red team can steal it, then they win. If the blue team can stop them, then they win. This is traditionally done inside an organization, a more mature organization. The problem is it's not really reflective of real life. And why is that? Because they both work for the same organization. So how do we make this a little bit more reflective of real life? Well, what I do, or what I did with my security operations center, is I would bonus my red team, generally $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a piece, if they could steal the information. If my blue team could stop them, I'd bonus them. And now I've added in the profit incentive, which is the same incentive that the attackers have when they're trying to steal your data, right? So now, no longer is the red team not going to take the data because they don't want to get the blue team in trouble. They're going to chase a bonus, right? Because your attackers don't really care if the blue team gets in trouble or not. So it's just an interesting way that we kind of look at this, and we've kind of shifted this dynamic in order to make sure that we're protecting our information the same way that we would if we were working against an outside threat. So I think I'm getting close to running out of time, but if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. All right, we're at the WebSense booth, so if you guys want to come talk to us individually, feel free. Again, my name's Jeremy Wittkop. Thank you for your time.